Hi, this is Nathan Pierce from F5 Networks. You are watching the iWorkflow 101 series. We're up to episode 4. In this episode, we're going to cover iWorkflow clustering. So we're going to set up some high availability for your iWorkflow platform. And we're also going to cover the backup process. So to start with, we'll go right into clustering. The environment from the previous episodes is going to change a little. So previously we just had the one iWorkflow on 10.128.1.130 that was communicating with a big IP. I now have 3 iWorkflow platforms running as virtual machines on my laptop. I've shut down the big IP because I ran out of memory and CPU, so we don't need that though for the setup process. Now I've already given management IP addresses and licenses to each of these iWorkflows. We covered that back in episode 2, install and setup, so I'm not going to repeat that today because we've already done that one. So this is the environment we're going to create. We're going to take our existing iWorkflow, which has been renamed from iWorkflow to iWorkflow 1, as you'll see up the top here. And then we're going to add iWorkflow 2 and 3 to this cluster. So I'll go through how that works and what that looks like. So logging on to our iWorkflows. This one, other than the name change to iWorkflow 1, should look pretty familiar. It's got all the same settings from before. All of the services we've deployed are currently marked red because the big IP's turned off to give me some more resources. But everything you'll notice if you've watched any of the previous episodes, are the things we've deployed before. However, if I now go to iWorkflow 2 and log in, you'll see pretty much nothing. Okay, all empty. So what we'll do first is we'll go back to iWorkflow 1 here. We'll go into System. iWorkflow 3, by the way, is equally empty. I don't need to show you that. Under System, the first screen we get is iWorkflow Cluster. Now, before we add anything in, we're going to look at the 2 sections in here. So, localhost, that's the device itself, the one that we're currently logged into. And then we've got high availability cluster settings. So, we'll go into the localhost first, just so you can see. Now, so these are all the things that we set up in the initial setup wizard in the install and setup episode 2 of the iWorkflow 101 series. We've got a bit of information about the device itself. We can reset passwords, add different images to the same device and boot between them. We can perform software updates, which will happen in a different episode, and licensing. So we've got all of those things set up in here. Now we'll go into high availability cluster. Now there's 3 panes in here. You might ask yourself, if we look at this first pane, properties, it's got things like the display name and whether you want a custom login message. You might ask yourself, why is that not on the local host setting? Well, what it means is things that are in high availability cluster will affect all of the devices. So what we're doing is we're saving you from having to enter this individually in each one. So even if you don't have a cluster, you still only have to set it once here. Later when you add a cluster, it's just going to replicate those settings across. So in here we've got some login type settings, services. Again, you might recall these from our initial setup wizard. I still have the same ones in there. I do not have a time server, but I highly recommend a time server. Even if you have a standalone iWorkflow talking to a big IP, you should be using NTP to ensure they stay in sync and talk nicely. Even more important if you start using an iWorkflow cluster that you want those times in sync because they are synchronizing data between each other. So don't follow my example here. I just don't have an NTP server. You should use one. And then auth providers, you can add in some remote authentication. Again, this would be replicated across the cluster. So now we've had a look at those things. Let's actually add in the other devices. So I'm going to add in iWorkflows 2 and 3 to this cluster. So it's just the IP address 10.128.1.131 and the admin username and passwords that I set previously, and we hit add. Now this is really important. So if I had logged into iWorkflow 2 and been using it and added in some tenants, some clouds, I mean, you notice that I haven't, but if I'd put some in, they would get blown. The device that you are doing the adding from is the one whose settings and configuration gets pushed across the rest of the devices that are added to the cluster. So this is really important. So if you're introducing new ones in, ideally you want them to be brand new with no configurations, and they'll just consume the configuration of this particular one that I'm on right now. So this is definitely the way I want to do it, otherwise we'll lose all the data and settings from our previous episodes. So it's going to wipe everything on the next big IP. Now, everything except device-specific connectivity information. So, for example, it's not going to change the name or the management IP address of that iWorkflow, because then it wouldn't be able to talk to it anymore. Anything above that, so things that we see in cloud, yes, that will get blown away and reset. But anything in system specific to that exact iWorkflow, that will not get blown away. So see, it's still got its IP address of 131. Now, a message actually came up. The recommendation is that we have 3 peers. The reason we suggest that is if you have 2 and one of them fails for some reason, maybe the hypervisor it's running on the host dies or you're a power outage, well then you're really exposed. You only have 1. So we actually recommend that you add 3. So we give you this little message up at the top here. So now I'm going to add in the next one. So we'll add the IP address. 2. Whoops. Luckily, it's paying attention and giving me that red box, because clearly I'm not paying attention. There we go. And again, it's letting us know we're going to wipe everything off that destination device. That's okay. We approve that decision because we know it's an empty one. Or if it did have data, it's not data we want to keep, so we don't mind. So we're going to push that one out now. And then we go. It's adding the next one into the cluster. Now, something that's going to come later, this is the 101 series, which is all the GUI-driven operation. The 201 series is coming very soon, which is doing these same kind of functions, but only via the REST API, so not logging onto the GUI. We're going to be doing things like we did in episode 3, where we deployed an IAP template in the GUI. We're going to do that via REST calls in the 201 series. In the 301 series, we're actually going to start doing some REST extensibility. We're going to be creating some microservices that will run on the iWorkflow so that you can start building your own workflows into this system that don't already exist. Now, there's a directory on the box. We're going to go into this in the 301 series where you put your Node.js JavaScript files. They will also get replicated in the cluster. This is important. So you don't have to worry about copying them after. Once you start extending the workflows and capabilities of this, that'll be covered in the 301 episode, they will also get replicated across your cluster. So everything's safe. There's nothing you have to run and worry about later. So now we have our cluster that is setting up and running. So we can take a look at these other devices. It's already got the information, the REST framework, everything that's going on. So now what we're going to do, now that we've added them to the cluster, I showed you before when I logged into this device that it had nothing on it. I probably shouldn't have stayed logged in while I was adding it to a cluster. Let's be kind and just log out and log in again to force a quick refresh. Okay, and now we are in. You will notice this is iWorkflow 2. It's aware of the cluster. It has the same information about the other devices. And then if we go into cloud, it has the same information about how to communicate. And this is obviously quite important when you think about the fact that we don't have a concept of active standby with iWorkflow. So there's no master slave. They're all masters. In fact, I could have some ops staff logged into this iWorkflow deploying a service, and at the same time logged into this iWorkflow and also deploying a service. So there's we don't force all the communication to go through one. Now this is more of an operational decision that each customer might make differently. Obviously you might not want to have 2 people logging in to the same service that was deployed and making the same changes to each of those. This could end up in a little bit of confusion. I mean, it's extremely unlikely, I guess, for two people to log into different two iWorkflows and make the exact same change. And that could cause some confusion with synchronization. You may make the decision in your organization that you just select all changes go through iWorkflow 1 and the other two are merely for synchronization and redundancy. Or maybe you want to split responsibility of data center 1 functions can be done on 1 and data center 2, or maybe departmental. It's up to you how you decide how to use this, but be aware that you probably you want to avoid multiple people editing the same thing across different iWorkflows at exactly the same time. So anyway, that is the setup of iWorkflow clustering. Now we have 3 of them running. They've learned everything about each other. We're good to go. Any settings you make in this high availability cluster section will now be replicated across the 3. One last point to add, we recommend for the highest resilience that these run on different hypervisor hosts, and ideally those hosts are on different power supplies. That is so that should one fail, not just the iWorkflow platform, but if the host it was running on should fail, or even if there was a power failure to the server that the host and iWorkflow was running on, we don't want to affect all 3. If you put all 3 of them on the same virtual machine host and on the same server, then it only takes one thing to fail, could wipe out the entire lot in one go. So something else to just consider when you set up this environment. Yeah, we have now got an all-active 3-device iWorkflow cluster up and running.